I want to welcome everyone who's watching from all of our campuses and those that are watching us online. We are continuing a series that will take us through the month of June. It's called Seed. And today I'm excited to talk to you about Matthew chapter 13. And at our central campus, we are talking a lot about legacy. And that word legacy, when you think about it, it is a big word. I mean, literally, when you think, I want to leave a legacy with my life, it almost sounds kind of arrogant to say that you want to do that. Because you're saying something that is tied to words like dynasty, kingdom, greatness. It's almost like that word is too big. It's almost too impossible. The word legacy is almost like it's unreachable because people that leave a legacy are extraordinary. And we think of us sometimes and we think, I don't have Bill Gates' mind. I don't have Elon Musk's ingenuity. I don't have Steve Jobs' creativity. I don't have Warren Buffett's investment savvy or LeBron James' natural athletic ability or Justin Timberlake's musical ability, or I am not somebody who is as inspiring as a Winston Churchill. I mean, how can I leave a legacy? I'm not like one of those great guys. I have a buddy, he loves Winston Churchill so much. And one of the things about Winston Churchill is everything the guy said was profound. I mean, it's like so profound. You see his quote everywhere. I have a friend, if he hears a great quote and can't figure out where it came from, he just gives Winston Churchill the credit. Like over and over again. And, when you hear of the word legacy, you attach it to people like that. I mean, people that have this great gift, or they have this extraordinary ability, or maybe they have a resource that you and I have never been given. And honestly, we might never in our lives have the individual accomplishments of any of these people. But I really honestly believe that we can do something that is lastingly significant together. I was praying through this message earlier today, and I was thinking about all the different buildings our church owns now. And I was thinking about the building that we have at our Palouse campus, and think of the legacy that building has left. Like, there was a group of people decades ago that dreamt of a church building in that location. And now you fast forward to 2018, and decades later, it's still changing lives and impacting lives. And our Everett campus, we just went through this project where we bought a building and remodeled the building. And you drive by that building on the corner, and you got to remember that there were a group of people that said, what if? What if we built a church right here? What could happen in this community? It's amazing to think that they built that church not knowing that in 2018, Canyon Creek would launch a campus in Everett and eventually occupy that building and, blow the roof off the place. And that is what a legacy is. And oftentimes, we attach legacy to an individual, but I think if we think together, we can do things that are lastingly significant. And it really boils down to you and I taking our lives right now and being willing to scatter seed. And that is what Matthew 13 is all about. I'm going to read starting in verse 3. This was Jesus sharing a parable. And Jesus shared parables because he wanted to share a story that people could relate to. So it's a fictional story, but it has a lot of truth to the story. And so he shared the story that many people can connect with. And he said, a farmer went out to sow seed. And as he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still, other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160, 30 times what was sown. And then Jesus says, whoever has ears, let them hear. And then he went on and he continued teaching, and he eventually referred back to this parable in verse 18 when he said, listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution come because of the word, they quickly fall away. Then he says, the seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of his life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word and make it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. I want to share with you how we take something this small and we do something really significant with it with our individual lives. And I really have two quick thoughts for you today. The first one being, you need to, when it comes to seed, you need to think, I want to cause a ripple with my life. We know and understand what a ripple effect is. A ripple effect is where you take a stone and you throw it into water and it ripples out. And what we know about a ripple is the larger the stone and with the more force that it hits the water, the longer the ripple and the bigger the ripple. The word ripple is defined as a spreading, pervasive, often unintentional influence. You see, my hope is that in every community where we have a campus, we cause a ripple effect. That with every one of our lives and every one of our living missionally and everything we do, every outreach, every door hanger, every person that we help and interact with, that we leave this ripple that begins to spread out. And eventually, it has this pervasive influence for the cause of Christ. So we want to, with our lives, cause a ripple effect. And you would say, well, Pastor Brandon, how do I make a ripple? Like, give me a practical idea of how I can throw a stone and it causes a ripple in my everyday life. Well, I want to encourage you, don't wait. Do something today for tomorrow. Do one thing, make one choice, take one step. That's it. Just make sure that before you leave today, you think, I want to do something with my life that makes a positive impact for tomorrow. When we talk about things like legacy, you don't jump into a legacy in one day. You know, we are in the process of building the Central Campus building. Can I be real? I didn't just come up with an idea of a building and the next day it happened. Like, unfortunately, I didn't come up with it and the next year it happened either. It takes time. You know, this weekend is grad Sunday, grad weekend, and we have graduates here, and you don't get a degree in a day. You don't get a college degree in a day. I think it's a great idea. Like, I'm working right now on my doctorate. I wish I could only take one class and be done. But instead I get to spend all summer studying, and then I get to go spend a month in Kentucky, and then I get to do it again next year. And then I get to do it again the next year. But it doesn't happen overnight. But if I keep delaying and I keep waiting, I'll never get started. If I don't do anything, nothing will happen. But for those of you that have graduated from college or you've got a graduate level degree, you know what happens. You take one class at a time. You get one class, you check it off, then you go on to the next class. You don't just pick up a guitar and be a rock star. You got to practice and play in front of people and gain confidence. You don't just pick up a basketball and win the NBA championship. You don't just pick up a hockey stick and win the Stanley Cup. Unless you're the Vegas Knights. Then you can do it in the first year. But has anybody ever seen the movie, I'm dating myself, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? It's like one of the ultimate 80s movies. And it's all about time travel and heavy metal. And one of my favorite lines to say, and I really honestly believe this in my whole heart, is that music peaked in the 80s. Once there was 80s hair heavy metal, just like music peaked, and it's been downhill ever since. And this movie was all about 80s heavy metal. And it's about two guys that someone from the future came back to help them because the band was about to break up. And the band couldn't break up because their music was so impactful and powerful in the future, it caused world peace. I know, it's an 80s movie, just go along with it. But they had to do everything they could so that the band didn't break up, and so they had to help them pass, this is just ridiculous, I can't believe I'm saying it. They had to help them pass a history report. So they gave them, everything I'm saying, it sounds so much more ridiculous as it's coming out of my mouth. They had to get in a time-traveling phone booth. I know. And so they went back in time to all these historical events, and they captured a historical figure to bring them live to their oral report, so they could pass. And at the end of all of this, they get an A on their report, but the legacy of what they're supposedly supposed to do seems so absurd to them because they couldn't even play an instrument. So they're told that our music is going to be so powerful, it's going to cause world peace, and they were terrible. So my favorite line from the whole movie is where Bill looks at Ted and he says, Ted, I think we should learn how to play. And so then they hop in the time-traveling phone booth, go back in time and teach themselves how to play. But my whole point is, do something today for tomorrow. Now, I'm a big picture guy. Like when I view life from a 30, 50,000 foot level. I'm a vision guy. One of the problems that I have is I'm a futurist. And what I mean is that I can get so consumed with the future and the possibilities and what could be that what stresses me out the most is the present reality. So when I see our Central Campus building, I see the building. I imagine the thousands of people that will get saved here, the thousands of people that we will baptize. I see it full of people, multiple services, people worshiping God. I see myself preaching in that building, but I get stuck in the present reality. And it's overwhelming when I think about permits and contracts, and I look at that legacy fundraising sheet, and I see all the funding that still needs to happen. Today, Paul and I spent 2 hours with our architect, our project manager, and our contractors, and by the time I left, I am not kidding, I had a headache and my stomach hurt. Because it seems so outrageous what we are trying to do. And I drove away, and I was just like, all right, Lord, I literally looked at everybody in the room, and I said, I know I got to make a big decision. You got to give me the weekend to pray about this. Like, I need to hear from Jesus, because you're asking me to make a decision that is the best of two impossible situations. And I drove away, and what I felt the Holy Spirit really speak to me is say, Brandon, take one step at a time. One brick at a time. One legacy gift at a time. One decision at a time. Do something today for tomorrow. You don't need to build a building and to make every decision right now. Just do something for tomorrow. Start a ripple, throw a pebble, do something. You see, in the parable of the sower, we read about this farmer who went out and he sowed seed. Just grabbed a bunch of seed and he let it go. That is the job of a farmer, to sow seed. It's not, there's no guarantee that when he sows seed that it's going to grow. If you think about it, look at all the different circumstances that actually cause a seed to not grow. I mean, sometimes it can rain too much. Sometimes it's too sunny. Sometimes it's not on fertile soil. There are so many reasons that seeds won't grow. It's not the sower's responsibility to grow the seed. The sower's responsibility is to plant the seed. And there is a principle that the more seed you scatter, the greater opportunity and likelihood you'll have a harvest. So do something today for tomorrow. And the more seeds that you sow, the more that you scatter, the more likelihood one's going to stick. Because if one grows, one seed doesn't just produce one fruit, it multiplies. So do something today to tomorrow. Take your son and throw a football with your son. Read your Bible. Read one verse in the Bible. Start taking one class. Go out of your way, meet one neighbor. Pick one verse and memorize one verse. Help one person. Be kind to one person. Do one thing today for tomorrow. One of my favorite illustrations. I use it at least once every couple years. There's a beach, and the tide had gone out, and the beach was covered by thousands of starfish. And there's this little boy who's walking along the beach, and he's picking up one starfish at a time and throwing it into the water. Just one at a time, throwing it into the water. Eventually, an adult comes upon this child and says, when he looks at the thousands of starfish that are dying in the heat on the beach, and he says, "Why are you doing this? What you're doing is a waste of time. What you're doing and all of this effort, it doesn't matter." And as the moral of the story goes, the little boy picks up a starfish and waves it in front of the adult and says, "It matters to this one," and throws it in the water. And it's that reminder that do something. You might not be able to change the world right now by yourself, but you might be able to impact one person's life. So start a ripple. My second thought with scattering seed is live out the principle of paying it forward. There's a movie that came out about 10, 12 years ago called Pay It Forward. It's really a terrible movie, to be honest with you, but the principle behind the movie is really good. And I have terrible taste in movies, and I hate the movie because it has meaning. Like, I always joke that my life has meaning, so when I go to a movie, I want to escape from meaning. But this movie has meaning, so you girls will probably love it because you'll cry and stuff like that. It stars the kid from The Sixth Sense, for those of you that are older. But the movie is about a kid who's sitting in his social studies class, and his teacher gives everyone in the class assignment for their final. And he says, "I want you to think of something that has the ability to change the world. Come up with an idea that can change the world, and then put that idea into action." And so this little kid comes up with this idea of paying it forward. That in its human nature, you repay what happens to you. If somebody does something good to you, you do something good back to them. That's the way that life works. It's kind of like this morality transaction that we have between each other. But instead of, repaying somebody, you pay ahead. Like you just out of the blue, you do something irrationally kind to someone, and when they're shocked by your generosity, you turn to them and say, someday you pay it forward to somebody else. And as the story of this movie goes, it ends up impacting people like around the United States. And this small little ripple of paying it forward impacted lives all over. And years ago, I decided to try this pay it forward phenomenon. And some of you might have been in the church years ago when I did this. I gave every person in the church a $5 Starbucks card. And I said, your job with this is to not buy coffee for yourself. Your job is to buy coffee for some stranger at a Starbucks and just see what happens. And I made this, and it's kind of been a practice of my life ever since, that if I go through a Starbucks drive-thru, I always pay for the person behind me. So we used to have a building over by Boeing in Everett, and there's this Starbucks on Evergreen Way that I would always hit on my way to work, and I always bought coffee for the person behind me. And so our whole church is doing this for a season. And I would do this, honestly, for years at this particular Starbucks, and I became known as the guy that always paid for the coffee for the people behind them. So I would go sometimes and have meetings inside the Starbucks, and the manager of the Starbucks would give me like $50 Starbucks cards on a regular basis just to say, thank you that you do this. And he started doing that because he said, there was one day you paid for the person behind you. And he said, me and my employees counted that it happened 13 consecutive times that people began to pay it forward. Invest in something today for the future. For those of you that are graduating, there is a principle of investment called the power of compound interest. So you're going to get money for your graduation. And I'm like speaking blessing over your life. Okay, like speaking it. You are going to get $6,000 for graduation. Some of you are like, I want 60. Good luck. But let's say it's $6,000. Of course, you take the first $1,000 and you buy a brick. And then you take the other $5,000 and you invest it. And again, because I'm speaking blessing over you, and this is me pretending, you're getting an 8% rate of interest on that investment. If you just take it right now, your $5,000, you never touch it again at 8%, by the time you turn 65, it will be $160,000. That is the power of compound interest. So invest in something today for the future. I think the other part of this is beware of sacrificing something today, doing something today that is a sacrifice for the future. And I watch people all the time, and 90% of the marriage issues that we deal with as a pastoral staff are because people wanted to gratify themselves today, not thinking about what was going to happen tomorrow. Probably one of my favorite stories, like modern stories, is the story of Facebook. In 2003, Mark Zuckerberg was 23 years old, and he started Facebook. 2 years later, as a 25-year-old, someone offered him $1 million for Facebook. Most 25-year-olds would have taken the money and ran. But this was Mark Zuckerberg's response, and it's a famous response. He said, why would I take a $1 billion idea and sell it for $1 million? 5 years after that moment, Facebook was worth $6.9 billion. Okay, did you know that today, as of this moment today, Mark Zuckerberg is worth $76 billion. And that is because he believed he had a billion-dollar idea and he refused to sell it for immediate gratification because he was believing for the future. And I'll tell you, most of us, if we were honest, we'd have taken that money and ran, because the human nature is immediate gratification. And we oftentimes sacrifice the future for pleasure right now. You know, I think about what we are doing with this building, and I have to remind myself of this over and over again. That when we get an unsolicited offer for $4 million for this building, I have to remind myself that there is going to come a day where we are going to do something that people are not going to understand how it ever got done. And then when the offers unsolicited increase, I always have to step back and just think, I am not going to settle for this now when I believe there's going to come a day we will do something that will be so exponentially greater. I don't want to sell this property right now and for the rest of my ministry life wonder what could have been with this. You don't take a $1 billion idea and sell it for $1 million. My son Judah, I remember when we first started giving him drum lessons. It cost me $100 a month. After, 3 or 4 months, I finally got to hear Judah play. And I got to be honest, I expected like some Motley Crue. Like I was expecting my son to now be like Tommy Lee. He wasn't. Then I expected at least he'd be like the Beatles. I'd hear like some Ringo Starr, right? Instead, he knew how to hold the drumsticks right. Like, what did I pay for? Well, I mean, realistically, what I wanted was completely absurd. I mean, you don't take a few lessons and all of a sudden you're Ringo Starr or Tommy Lee. It takes years and years, but fast forward to today, anytime I ever hear anybody talk about Judah, they always talk about what an extraordinary drummer my kid is. So you invest in something today for the future. I need to be blunt, church. Man, when I think about what we are trying to do, especially when you're somebody who struggles a little bit with anxiety at times, I mean, it's overwhelming. Man, I see this dome, I see the budget, I see all the funding need, and there's times like what we're doing, it seems like utterly impossible. And my stress level peaks, shoots through the roof. And over again, here's what I remind myself. Get up, take one step forward, do something today for tomorrow. Some of you wonder why Brandon travels so much. In fact, you get annoyed with me because I travel a lot. I get annoyed with you because you get annoyed with it. And that is because, like, I was sharing with one of our elders who was playing the guitar today, and he said, boy, you've had a long week. And I said, actually, since Monday, I think I've worked almost 55 hours in the short period of time, because I've had meetings every single week. I get here early in the morning, and I work really late. So when I'm here, I am obsessively here, because I've got so many things going on. And then I get to the point where I get stressed and overwhelmed, and I think I need to disconnect. And so I get out of town for a couple days. So don't get bitter when I leave town, because it's how I refresh and get replenished and kind of reconnected and able to get disconnected and be able to get some perspective. And so in the middle of everything we're doing with this building, I sensed my stress increasing, and I thought, I got to get out of town before I get stressed. And so I thought, I don't care. I'm just going to fly to Vegas, go to a Golden Knights game. And so as I was waiting for the Golden Knights game, I'm walking along the Vegas Strip, and I know it trips people out. Why does our pastor like Vegas? One of the reasons I like Vegas is because it didn't exist 50 years ago. And so I'm seeing like this major city that didn't exist, that somebody had to come up with the idea for this, because this is like my world. It's something that wasn't, and now it is. And so as I'm walking along the Strip and I'm stressed about the building program and everything that's going on, the Lord reminded me of my motorcycle. Pop a picture up. I love my Harley. What you might not know is that the very first capital campaign that our church ever did, I had a Harley that I loved. I had a Fat Boy. It was really cool. I felt like the Lord told me that I needed to sell my Fat Boy for our capital campaign. And I wrestled through it, but I eventually did it and gave the proceeds to the capital campaign. So as I'm thinking about all of the funding, and by the way, at the 10-year anniversary of the church and of me planting the church bought me this motorcycle. So I thought it was a really cool story. I donated my motorcycle for the capital campaign, and then, we've got all of these different buildings, and our church is now over 1,000 people and big budgets, and as a thank you, the church bought me this motorcycle. So every time I ride it, every time I see it, I'm reminded, number one, that it's cool, but number two, that my church loves me, and I'm reminded that, you invest now for something in the future. It's one of my favorite possessions. And as I'm stressed to high heaven about all this extra money that I need to raise, walking along the Vegas Strip, the first thing I think is, maybe I just take a lot of money, put it on black, and see if I hit it big. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't think that. I started thinking, well, I need to all I can do is what I can do. I have no control over what the Holy Spirit lays on your heart to do. I can only do what I can do. And then the Holy Spirit said, why don't you sell your motorcycle again? I'm like, no. And the first thing I thought is, because I'm going to tell my wife I'm going to do this, and she's going to say immediately, you're going to sell it and want to go buy another one. And so I wrestled with it the entire walk on the Vegas Strip as I'm heading to T-Mobile Arena for the Knights game. And I just thought, I have no control over what anybody else does, but I have control over what I can do. Right. And I want to make sure that I do something today for tomorrow. And I don't have control over what you do, but I have control over what I do. Right. And I need to do my part. And this is my seed into our building. My beautiful motorcycle that I am gladly giving, so that lives can be changed here in the future. You see, what we are doing now is going to outlive us. It's going to outlast us. It's our legacy. What you might not know about me, especially if you're new to the church and you follow me on social media, I used to not travel very much other than outside speaking. In fact, 10 years ago was the first time, other than trips to Mexico, that I'd ever been out of the country. You see, it was 10 years ago, our missions team at the church said, Pastor Brandon, we want you to go visit all of our missionaries in Africa. And so our missions director, Dan Fortune, he planned a 17-day trip that he and I went on to visit all the missions bases that our church supports in Africa. If you were a part of the church back then, you might remember how badly I didn't want to go. Number one, I'd never done this type of trip before. Number two, I'd never been away from my family this long, and my kids were little, and I was thinking I'm going to be lonely. I'd never been on this long of a plane ride. What do? I have trouble sleeping. I'm an insomniac, and so all of these fears that were sort of irrational. I'm thinking I'm going to get E. coli, I'm going to get malaria, I'm going to die, I might never see my kids again. All of these irrational fears came into my life, but I ended up going on this trip, which is ironic because now I can't wait to travel to foreign countries. In fact, this summer I get the privilege of traveling with Convoy of Hope to Europe, Then in the fall, I get to go with a group of people from our church to Israel. I can't wait. And so now this is just a normal part of my life. But back then I was a fraidy cat like you that won't travel. But we had one day off on this 17-day trip. And we went on a safari for one day. And did you know that Dan Fortune, in that one day on that safari, he took 7,000 pictures? He took 100 pictures of an elephant pooping. I'm telling you, next time you see one of those wild rabbits running through Mill Creek, just let Dan Fortune know. He'll be thrilled. Probably run over with a whole camera shoot and take a picture of it. The guy is like, it's like a 50-year-old kid in the Funko store, or like your wife at the mall or whatever. I don't know. But on that safari, while Dan's excited about every animal, I'm playing the typical Gen Xer part. I'm like, big deal. Seen one warthog, you've seen them all. Another giraffe, whoa. I'm kind of that guy. What amazed me the most, though, on the entire safari was the shepherd's tree. I was amazed by a tree. I live in Seattle. Trees are everywhere. But our safari guide told us the story of the shepherd's tree. He said it's called the shepherd's tree. He said because shepherds would look for this tree. Because in the middle of the heat, this tree provided like an umbrella of protection for them. So the shepherds had an affection for this tree. They would go hide under the shade of the tree. They'd find refuge under this tree. The bark was something, I don't remember what it was, but it was useful. There was they would find water at the root of this tree. This tree was like a miracle for a shepherd. And they had deep affection for this tree, which is why it's called the shepherd's tree. And it was in that moment on that safari, hearing the story about that tree, is what I really thought that's the purpose of our church. Our campuses and all of our communities are to be like a shepherd's tree. In the middle of the wilderness, in the middle of the wild, where there's beasts roaming, people can come and find refuge at our churches. And so what continues to move me forward in the mission of our church, what continues to move me forward as we build our central campus building, as we buy an Everett building and remodel our Palouse building and dream of other campuses and other locations and other buildings, is that we are creating a place that is a refuge for people, where people can experience miracles. You see, individually, we might not have any great accomplishments. But I wonder what we could do together if we understand the principle of reaping and sowing and scattering seed. You take as much seed as you can and you scatter as much seed as humanly possible. And it might seem too big, it might seem too overwhelming, but if you and I each do something, invest something today, one of our seed, maybe a bunch of our seed, is going to hit fertile soil. And we are going to reap a harvest together. I want to ask everybody to bow your heads, close your eyes.